Hey everyone, Hugo here. In this video, I'm actually just going to do like a little getting started tutorial with DLT or DLT Hub. Relevant to you if you guys do data ingestion and you want to pay less money for it and you've got a bit more time on your hands. DLT is a super cool package. Pip install DLT and go. And yeah, we've all written connectors at some point. So let's crack on and get to it. So if we start with folder structure, uh, instead of creating a repo, I'm just going to create a folder. I'm going to call it test. I am also going to create an environment. So to create an environment, I would cd into my ems file, and then you do like python env venv env python env DOT test. Python env venv test env. And this is going to create all the folders I need to create a virtual environment. While it's doing that, I'll show you this one. So to activate a virtual environment, you have to basically execute this file. No, normally I just do that by cding into it and then doing activate.bat, which will show up after this has been created. But yeah, this is very important because if you don't do this, then you have no idea what packages are going to be running. It's also a good way to make sure you know what Python version you're using, because that's gonna have some that's gonna have an impact, right, on doing DLT. And now we can see that the test env I just created has been created. Yeah, no need to go into this. Screw it, we might as well. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and do that. So the next thing to do is you're going to say pip install DLT. Okay, so this is now done. We are in our test env, and now we're also cding here. So before we start, let's check out Python version 3.11. Okay. Now I'm on Windows, sorry, so I've done that in my VM. Done my pip install DLT. Let's check our DLT version. 1.4.0. Cool. So let's try picking up data from HubSpot and moving it here. So all we're going to have to do is do this DLT init HubSpot command. I don't want to load it to DuckDB. I want to load it to BigQuery. So let's see what happens. Okay, so something's happened. Let's go ahead and see what. Cool. So when you do DLT init, two things are going to happen. First thing that's going to happen is you're going to get this folder, this file, which is essentially a bunch of functions. Second thing is you're going to get this little folder here that has an init file with a bunch of resources in it, and then a load of helpers. So these are just functions. And essentially what DLT has done here, you're also going to get this with your sources, your config, and your secrets. So we're going to need to add these. This is going to be important. I'll do that in a bit. Okay, so to work out what these are, the best way to think about it is like sort of integration, right? So you have HubSpot, and then within HubSpot you have lots of tables. HubSpot as an API endpoint is basically the source, and then the tables are resources. So what the source does is have all of the logic that would, that you'd want, like when you connect to an integration, and then the resource has the logic that you would write if you were trying to get the data. So in this case, we're defining this resource on this source. It's called companies, takes in an API key, which is for authentication, properties, which are the fields to return, and then whether or not you include custom properties, which is sort of HubSpot specific thing, but is probably common across all CRM integrations. And this returns a function called CRM objects. So let's go and find that. So this function returns an iterator of this class tData items, and essentially all it's doing is calling this function called fetch data. Aha, so fetch data is in helpers, so let's go ahead and find that. And now we can see what this is going. So this is fetching data from HubSpot endpoint using a specific API key and yielding the properties of each result. Happy days. So this code looks pretty familiar, right? It's like you put in the endpoint, get the API key, requests.get, data is the JSON. This is the logic for the paging or the pagination. If the field results is in data, then you can sort of keep cracking on, keep iterating through the data. And as you're going, you're appending, and then at the end, you return that. So that's kind of how DLT works. If you wanted to build this yourself, right, then obviously it would just be a question of saying, I'm going to call this call this folder like Hugo's API. In fact, we can do it here. So if I wanted to do my custom source, call this Hugo's API. That typing is horrible. And then, this could be something like that. This would be the name of my source. Probably won't have any resources, just have one. Well, I think that's all I need. Yeah, that's all I need. So DLT resource name equals like Hugo stuff. And yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get these CRM objects, but you would obviously define these yourself. But yeah, we don't really need that. Okay, cool. So I'm actually going to go to one I made earlier so I can show you what we do next. So if I try to run this pipeline, then we're actually going to go ahead and run every single resource. So we don't want to do that in the case of HubSpot because it's going to copy over every single table. And we don't know how much that's going to cost. We don't know how long it's going to take. So ideally, we just want to do it with one. So let's go and see what that looks like. So the first thing you'll note is that if you want to just have one resource in your source, you can just delete all the other resources. The other thing to do is in the HubSpot pipeline, you can do this thing called binding. So I'm going to go to the docs here. So if you only wanted to load a single property or like a certain number of properties, then you would bind the data, like bind the props to the object on the data. And then if you only want to load contacts, then you have to do pipeline.run and then load data dot with resources and then pass a list, I think, or just the single item. Oh no, so it's not a list, it's that. Do it that way. I don't need to do that because I've only got one, but I did want to check the custom properties. So if you wanted to get custom properties from HubSpot, you have to sort of manually specify them here. Next thing to do is add some logging. Logging is super helpful. And then you're kind of good to go. So what you have here is a run pipeline function. To do that, you create this dlt.pipeline object, specify the name of the pipeline, specify the name of the data set. That's going to be our data set in BigQuery, and then obviously put in the destination. I just have this very basic test.py file, which is importing the HubSpot integration. I've then set my API key as an environment variable, which I mentioned before, and then I'm going to call that. So let's go ahead and run test.py. Yeah, the other thing I'll add is, while we're waiting for that to happen, is DLT creates this .dlt file in your user directory. I don't really think you need to do anything with this. I initially thought this is where the secrets would be. It's not. The secrets are here. Yeah. So you don't need to worry about that. Yeah, and the other interesting thing is that when you do DLT init, you'll see that we get this HubSpot folder, but we don't have one for BigQuery. So it's not clear to me how you would like write your own destination, if you know what I mean. It's clear how you'd write your own source, but not your own destination. Maybe we can find that in the docs. Yeah. Well, maybe one can contribute to the open source repo. Anyway, cool. So I've printed some data, and there's a lot going on there. So let's go to BigQuery and see what we've got. Cool. So within this DLT HubSpot data set, I now have the companies table, which is pretty cool. I have companies contacts, which is just like a mapping table you kind of have to have in HubSpot. So it's good that DLT's picked that up. And I have the company's deals table. Now, there are a bunch of like weird custom properties in HubSpot, and I wanted to make sure we could get those over. So if you see here, we've got this HubSpot time and opportunity field. If I do a Control F for that here, it should be there. There it is. So that's pretty cool. And I've not really had to write any Python code to make this work, which I like. You also see that there is some stuff here. So if we look at DLT loads and we query that, we'll see that we've got a log of when we're inserting everything, which is cool. If we do the same for pipeline state, you'll see some IDs. State is not particularly helpful. Not sure what that means. But it's interesting that the pipeline name is HubSpot. I would guess that if I change this, not sure what happens. Okay, looks like it's still working. And then DLT version. Let's see what's in there. Oh wow, there's a lot in here. Cool, yeah, I have no idea what that is. But yeah, this is pretty cool. So now that this is working, the next thing to do is obviously to run this. Actually, yeah, let's just go ahead and take a look at DLT loads. See if we have the new pipeline in there. Schema name, HubSpot, not quite the same thing. HubSpot 2. Okay. So I'm not sure what happened to my old pipeline, my new pipeline, but maybe I'm missing a trick. But the most important thing is that if I look at companies, I've got my company's data, which is really cool. Cool. So the next thing to do is deploy this. Okay, so your DLT code is working. Happy days. Next thing you're going to need to do is test it. This is really important. I'm not going to go into it, but that'll be a topic for another video. But yeah, test it, CI/CD, different environments, and then happy days. So once that code is on your main branch, the next question is how you're going to run it. So before I mentioned that we had this secrets file. This is a TOML file. Under the hood, I think DOT must be doing something like using poetry. So as long as you've got this TOML file, it's going to be able to automatically check out these, this project ID secret, this location secret, this API key secret, and you're not going to have to configure it locally, which is great. Apart from that won't work when you're in GitHub. So in GitHub, I think it's fairly easy, right? You just sort of put in environment variables, but then the question becomes, okay, like what are those environment variables? And here I've just got this folder, this file, which is just running the function, but this is going to fail. Now, fortunately, DLT offers quite a wide range of methods to access credentials. So if I remove myself or if I find credentials, you'll see that there is a naming convention that happens. So this sort of corresponds to this. So your project ID was going to be, Chris Tab's calling me, not now, Chris. Destination, double underscore, BigQuery, double underscore, credentials, double underscore, project ID. So pretty simple. And that's what I've got locally. So to sort of replicate that, I'm going to add that to Orchestra. So it's app.getorchestra.io. And log in. Now, because all we're doing here is basically running Python, in Orchestra, all you need to do is build a Python integration. So what I'm doing here is using a personal access token and passing the repository name, which is Orchestra HQ test Python execution, into Orchestra. And you can see to facilitate the DLT pipeline, I've got these different credentials that I would have had otherwise. I can show you this because we're automatically hashing things, which is pretty cool. So yeah, having done that, we'll now be able to run this in production, which is really cool. So to do that, you would build a pipeline in Orchestra. And to my point at the beginning of the video, this is really cool because you can, pick and choose if you want to build your own connectors and run Python, or if you want to buy connectors. So best of both worlds. Something I forgot. So requirements.txt, really, really important. Make sure you have this. You should also pip install DLT with the sort of adapter that you want. And believe you also need OpenPyXL. For things like HubSpot, you may need things like the HubSpot API client, but you definitely need DLT. So make sure you have this requirements.txt file. Then when you're going to build the container in Orchestra, we're just going to run pip install our requirements.txt, and then this Python command. If you wanted to be in a sort of different directory, or you just wanted to clone a specific part of the repo, you could. Or even a different branch, which is nice. And yeah, all you have to do then is save it and run it. I'm going to show you one that we did earlier. And yeah, this is kind of what we've got. So our DLT command has succeeded. So pip is our package manager. We're just doing Python, run this file. Before that, pip install requirements.txt. Then we can go check out the logs. So this is everything we had when we were setting up the environment. This was our command. So we've got my logger saying starting to run DLT pipeline. This comes from DLT. So my HubSpot companies took 14 seconds, which is not bad. We've got our BigQuery destination. No failed jobs. And then some bad printing for me. And the cool thing about doing it in Orchestra is there's obviously no infrastructure to maintain. And if you want to chain on other tasks like dbt models, you can. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful. That's sort of how I first set up DLT. I used a very simple example. I didn't build my own connector. Stuff that would be cool to do is sort of build out more complicated connectors. Ideally, more high volume ones. It'd be cool to deploy stuff like this in a Lambda. Maybe explore a little bit more logging. Try to understand what's going on in these sort of loads tables a little bit more. That's really interesting. But yeah, it's a pretty cool package. Pretty nice way to save a bit of cash and run your own connectors. So yeah, if you like this, please give us a thumbs up and a comment. And yeah, see you all soon.